Well, hello everyone. I have been thinking about building relationships with students, and so I wanted to find a study that related to that. I initially planned on finding a study about how teachers interact with students based on their looks, and on my way to find that study I came across this one about teachers' pets, and I just couldn't resist, so I'm here to share that with you instead. Maybe I'll go back and find the original study I was looking for, but for now I got completely sidetracked and really into looking at the research on teachers' pets. And so I wanted to share that with you in case it's a phenomenon that you are finding in your classroom, or maybe you're not, and after this study you'll be thinking about it more. Well, hi, I'm Courtney. Welcome to my YouTube channel where we discuss educational research one study at a time so that you can incorporate it into your practice. All right, so this study is called The Teacher's Pet Phenomenon 25 Years On, and it's published in Social Psychology Education. This study was published in 2017, and it is listed as an open access publication, so you can go ahead and look for it as well. And I will have it linked in the description box so that you can get all of the citation information that you need. All right, so let's start with some of the background information about what is a teacher's pet. In this article, they are referred to just as pets frequently, which just is weird to me. It seems kind of icky as a name, so I will say teacher's pets as much as possible. A teacher's pet is a student or a few students in the classroom that have special relationships with the teacher. Usually the teacher is maybe a little bit extra nice to the student. They show more affection and more attention towards those students or that one student, and it's kind of the in crowd between the teacher and the student. To differentiate different types of favored students in classrooms, the author looks to research and found that there is the teacher's pet, like I was talking about, and then there's also class leaders, who are students who are quite popular amongst the other students, so like the popular kids, and the best students, so the students who get the highest grades in class and who find school to be quite easy for them. And so those are kind of the dominant groups of students who could qualify for class pets, and the class pet could be the best student, could be a class leader, or could be none of them. And there's different dynamics that come into play, which I'll get into when we look at the research deeper. Research about teachers' pets had been done 25 years prior to this study being conducted in an Israeli context. And so the author of this study decided to pick up this idea again and take a look at teachers' pets 25 years later and use the same type of study that was done in the Israeli context to see if it still had applications today. So the author wanted to replicate the study as much as possible in today's context. The author conducted this study in Poland, so there's another cultural context being looked at as well. This study had 2,164 students in it and 138 teachers, so quite a good chunk of people participating in this study. It looked at students who were in junior high and high school and the teachers who taught those students. So the teachers were associated with the students being interviewed, which I think is really important because then we're all speaking about the same type of dynamics, the same contexts that are happening. Respondents in the study were asked to complete a questionnaire. That's the way that data was collected. And the questions from the questionnaire were developed from a previous study, like I said, and they were translated into Polish. As well, the author did quite a good job with due diligence. The author decided to run a pilot test first to see if any of the questions needed updating or if there were any areas of concern that the students had. And so the author took a subset of the students who were in the study and ran the questionnaire through with them as well as a few of their teachers, and then interviewed all of the teachers plus 10 randomly selected students to get a sense of whether or not the questionnaire made sense, whether or not there was information missing or information that needed to be added, so that when data was actually collected and used for the full study, it would be more robust and more sound. The questionnaire looked at a ton of different aspects of teachers' pet culture. So it looked at demographic data, it looked at what goes into being a teacher's pet, it looked at student perspectives of teachers' pets, student perspectives of teachers who have teachers' pets, teacher perspectives, and so the findings were pretty interesting. 51.1% of respondents attributed the teacher's pet phenomenon with teacher behavior, not student behavior. So if you ask students and teachers to come up with a definition for teacher's pet, 51.1% of them focused on the teacher behavior, not the student behavior. And that's compared to 26.2%, which described a teacher's pet in terms of student behavior. So there's a huge disconnect there. It's not that the fault or the identity of teacher's pet stays with the teacher's pet student. It's more likely to be deflected onto the teacher. As well, 62% of responses about what a teacher's pet entailed focused on the negative aspects of being a teacher's pet. These negative aspects were things like using flattery to get what they wanted, manipulating the teacher to get their own way, wielding power to make the situation more favorable for them in the class. Now, if you look at teacher responses compared to student responses, teachers did tend to have a more positive outlook on teachers' pets. They tended to see teachers' pets in a more favorable light. They used more positive language to describe a teacher's pet, and they were more likely to say that a teacher's pet was deserving of the extra attention or time or affection that they received because they were very nice students and they were kind and helpful in the classroom and just all around pleasant people to be with. So of course you're going to be kind to them when they're being so kind back. Students, on the other hand, did not believe that teachers' pets were deserving of the extra attention they got. They tended to state that there were ulterior motives to the teacher's pet behavior and that it wasn't a fair learning situation for everybody in the class. 66.1% of teachers compared to 85.2% of students believed that there was a teacher's pet in their classroom. So it is widespread either way you slice it. However, students were far more in tune with the sense that there may be a teacher's pet in the classroom compared to teachers. And so that's important for us as teachers, because even though we may just think we have just positive relationships with students, which is something that I'm trying to foster, we have to be careful that we don't give the impression that we favor some students over others, because students are far more in tune with the relationships that we have with students than we know of. And this study did talk a lot about how teachers didn't perceive a teacher's pet dynamic taking place, but the students did. If we are trying to create really positive relationships with students in our classroom in a whole sense, we do need to pay attention to the way that students are perceiving the relationships that we build rather than what our intent is. Because if our intent is to just be very kind, and there's a few students that we're a bit extra kind to, and students perceive that in a negative way, that can do a lot of damage to the relationships that you're trying to build. So it is something worth keeping in mind as we build those connections with students in our classroom this year. A point that this study made that I found very, very interesting was that if you take the classes that were surveyed and you split them into classes that were more science-based versus more humanities-based, the science-based classrooms had far fewer noted incidents of having a teacher's pet compared to the humanities. And I have to just wonder what the heck is going on here. I have so many questions as a researcher. Is it because the type of instruction is different? Like maybe in the science classes, it's more direct instruction, and so you don't have those opportunities to build that type of relationship. Like there's more distance between the teacher and the subject matter. Is it that the gender of the teachers tends to be different and we have more of one type of gender compared to another gender teaching in the sciences compared to the humanities, and there's a difference there? Is it that when students are focused on science lessons, they're not focusing on teacher's pet phenomenon? Like what is happening here? And so I really think that that would be a good follow-up study to do, is why would there be a difference comparing the sciences to the humanities? If you have any insight onto that, please leave a comment below, because I'm very interested in that point. Super, not a huge significant point to the author's study, but when I read that, I thought that is, I don't have a good reason for why that might be. Another part of this study that I thought was really interesting was that when respondents were given the opportunity to provide an open-ended response about a teacher's pet in the class, they tended to use more positive language to describe them. So they would say things like, well, teachers' pets are helpful, and teachers' pets are always looking out for what the teacher needs, and they help other students in the class. So their definition was that the teacher's pets were helpful, but they didn't like the teacher's pet situation happening. So we acknowledge that it's helpful. We acknowledge that they're, great people. We don't like them. We don't like this dynamic. We don't like the, the outsider stance that we have not being in the in crowd with the teacher. And that's compared with only 37.2% of responses that focused on negative qualities of a teacher's pet, like they're conceited, they're egoistic, that kind of thing. Respondents were also asked who they would nominate if somebody had to go and talk to the teacher to work out a conflict. So, something happened in the class or a student got in trouble. Which student should we send to go talk to the teacher about this and try and even things out and sort it all out? And so here the author was looking at, should it be class leaders? Should it be the teacher's pet? Should it be the best student? And most of the respondents agreed that it should be the teacher's pet. And I find this super interesting too, because you'd think it would be the most popular kid in class, but really it's the students know that there is a teacher's pet and they have a good relationship, and we can now use that relationship to get gains for the class. So even though they might dissent about there being a teacher's pet, the rest of the class is perfectly comfortable using that relationship that student has for their own gains later on, but not necessarily acknowledging that. And depending on the dynamics of the classroom, the student leader, so like the most popular student, could also be the teacher's pet. And the teacher's pet could also be the best student. So there's different dynamics there and different overlaps that take place. Then the author talks about social distance. And this is, remember, written in 2017. So this is before we had social distancing as a practice of our everyday life, especially at school. In this case, social distance refers to how close you are with people. So kind of how you would have, your best friends, your good friends, your acquaintances. And so the author was comparing best students, class leaders, and teachers' pets. And they were comparing the social distance between those students to their peers and those students to the teacher. And what the author found was that class leaders were closer to their peers than to the teacher. Teachers' pets were closer to the teacher than their peers. And best students were equal. So if you were academically strong, you had just as good of a chance as having a great relationship with your teacher and having a great relationship with your peers, or potentially having a poor relationship with everybody, depending on the dynamics there. So then if we pop down to the discussion section of the article, the author notes that the results of this study were very similar to the initial study that was conducted 25 years ago, which is so very interesting to me because so many things have happened in 25 years. I mean, I went to the mall the other night and it does seem like the 90s are back, so maybe in that sense it does make sense. But so many other things have changed. We have social media, classrooms are different now, we have more hands-on learning experiences, more experiential learning, more 21st century teaching, sitting at different types of tables and, sensory things in the hallways so that you don't have to walk in a straight line, and body breaks and movements. And I feel like even the culture of the class leaders, like the popular kids in school, the profile of what they look like and act like is different now. The idea of, the bully and the jock and the popular, I feel like those have kind of melded in a weird different way, and yet we still have a very clear teacher's pet culture phenomenon still taking place, at least in this study in a Polish context. I would suspect it relates here as well. And so moving forward, what can we do with this information? Well, one of the big things that came out of this study is that teachers are not in tune with the teacher's pet phenomenon, or they think that other students don't notice. And what the research is showing is that students are more in tune with the teacher's pet phenomenon than the teachers are, and they're not into it. They don't like it. It creates tension in the classroom, and it's more related to a student not wanting to continue on with that teacher in the following year. So when you ask students, would you like to have your teacher next year? Depending on the severity of the class pet situation going on, students were more likely to say, no, I would like to not continue on, compared to classrooms that had lower incidence of a teacher's pet taking place. This is important for us moving forward. We really need to think about how we foster relationships, because it is easy to build. There's always a few kids in class where you just connect with them. It's so easy to build a relationship with them. They just have the social skills that really work. They're helpful, they're kind, they're polite. But then how can we meet the needs of building relationships with the rest of the class without sacrificing the relationships with those wonderful students as well? And so I don't have any answers for you. If you do, leave them in the comments below. But it is important to think about not only how are we reaching everyone, but how are we not leaving anybody behind in our ability and in our quest to reach everyone. And so that is something that I will be reflecting on as I work to build relationships this coming school year. So let me know in the comments what your experiences are with the teacher's pet phenomenon. Were you a teacher's pet, or was there one in your classroom? How did it work out? Did it create the tension that this article talks about, or was everything okay and people kind of went about their business? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Like always, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your teacher friends so that YouTube knows to send this type of content out to more people and it can reach a wider audience. And that's all I have for you today. Have a great day. Bye. I keep saying class pet, they're not hamsters.